Hello everyone, welcome to your next section. Today we are going to extend upon our if conditional statements to include the next part of an if statement, which is the else statement. You'll recall that with if statements, in order to get the code to run underneath your if statement that's indented out, that if statement needs to return as true. What happens when you want something to respond or do something different if it returns as false? And that's what the if statement is all about for this case, or at least when all other if statements don't return some sort of response. So this is another important aspect of if conditionals because this allows your condition statements to become much more dynamic. Else statements are a great catch-all. So you have a bunch of if conditions. If none of them work or fall through, you then have this catch-all else statement, which is like otherwise do something else. And it's very, very useful. I use it all the time. So what you're going to learn today is more conditional logic. We're going to go through the syntax of an if statement one more time, multiple times throughout this chapter, just so that you get more and more familiar and practice with it. And then we're going to introduce the else statement and how that works. So let's go through our definitions here. Like last time, an if statement is a command that runs additional code only if the operation, the statement that you crafted, returns as true. Now you can actually do this in a bunch of clever ways. You can have an if statement return true if some sort of condition is false, but it always has to return true. Your response, your operation has to make some sort of comparison that says, okay, yes, this is in fact a condition that is met, therefore I should run this set of code. So it does have to return true in that sense, but you can have false as a condition for true. Next, the else statement is a command that runs only if all other if statements have returned as false, as in like no other statement conditions were caught and could run. So there are two really important things that you should learn from this definition. The first one is that you can have an if statement without an else statement, but you can't have an else statement without an if statement. You know this to be true from our last lecture, but you can also tell from this definition. The requirement is that all other if statements are false. So if there are no if statements, an else statement can't possibly exist. The other thing that you can gather from this definition is yes, you can have more than one if statement, which we will talk about in our next section, our next lecture on elif. And that will be a little bit later once you kind of get a better handle of the if-else conditional logic. So with that in mind, guys, we're going to go into some syntax, and I'm going to show you how to, once again, how to do an if statement and how to craft your else statement on top of that. So what we have here, first thing is I've initialized some variables. You'll see that fi here and is 32 and si is 20. There we go. And you'll also see, let me just change my pen here, guys. Apologies for this. That's better. So yes, we have fi is 32 and second integer is 20. Next, in order to get this if conditional statement to go, we got to make sure our syntax is right for our if statement. So first we write if, we then have our conditional, which is this variable greater than this variable? And then we end our condition by adding this colon. And now we know that all other code that needs to run based on this condition needs to be indented because the colon is here. It actually tells us to indent because there's a colon. And then we would run all of the code we want to run here. There could be more than one line. It could be hundreds, millions of lines just for this one if statement. So the next part of this condition is now our else statement here, which is, you'll notice that we just write else in a colon. There's no conditional like there is for the if statement. And why is that? Because the else statement already has its condition. It's only going to run if this doesn't happen or if this is false. So you only need to write else for your else condition. You still need your colon here though, and then what happens with your else statement is indented as well. So you can print lesser, you can then print, I don't know, fail, you can have it do a bunch of stuff. But this is essentially how the syntax of your if else statement works. You write if, You give it a condition that needs to yield true in order for the indented work under the if to run, and then else is almost like otherwise, if all our if conditions don't run, do something else. Yeah, that's basically how it works. Let's now hop into Python and play with this a little bit more and see what's going on under the hood. So again, I opened up a terminal. I'm in Bash on a Mac computer right now because that's simple. I'm also in my default directory. So I write Python. I'm now in Python. So let's establish these variables like before. First integer, second integer is 32 and 20. Let us now play with some if conditions and see how this all works. If fi is greater than si, now remember this double period here is saying to Python saying, okay, I'm not running this line yet. I'm waiting for more information. Give me the rest of the commands, because it knows that this if condition passed, there was no errors in its syntax, so it needs to know what to do if this if statement actually occurs. So we're going to have it print greater, like we did before. Now let's just see what happens when we run this. It indeed does the greater thing, okay? So it does print greater because fi is greater than si. If we try this again with that, it's not going to work. So now, let's also include, so now you see here that we have printed, and we could go to this other line, but instead we're going to do our otherwise, and in this case we're just going to say print lesser, because there's no way that this could be, the only way, based on this conditional logic, if fi is not less than si, it must be greater than si. So what happens when we now do this? Last time it didn't print anything, but in fact it does print lesser. So now you notice that this also had a colon and I indented additional stuff here. Let's do one more example where we now have a string. First string equals test string, and second string equals test. And what we can now do is we can do, well, we'll start with first string. If first string equals second string, remember now we have this condition ended. We have our if statement, the word if, our condition closed by a colon, equals, and let's have it also print just that one there. Otherwise, we'll have it just print second string, which would be just test, and we'll see what happens here. So it prints test. Why? Because our first string doesn't equal our second string. We could do something like this, where this isn't a new command. If first string, so if second string in first string, this is a different type of logic operation that you can do with strings. Affirmative. And let's see what happens here. Does print affirmative. So it's saying if this string is anywhere in this other string, this should yield true. So we can do, one other thing here. Go not in, and then print affirmative, and then else not in. And what would we expect to happen here? This should still print affirmative, right? No, it prints not in. Why? Because we're saying if test is not in the string, and it is in the string, so this now yields a false response, because if this is true, which is not, our second string is indeed in our first string. So this if statement returned as false. And therefore, the else came in to print not in. Okay, guys, that's basically it for this class. Let us do a quick recap. So you just kind of got reintroduced to if statements and getting a little better at them. I introduced to you the else statement as well as a couple of word logic operators just to show you how to craft a conditional statement that can be true or false and get a certain result. So in the next section, we're going to be dealing with logic operators and the elif command. So this will really finalize your complete understanding of how an if statement works from all of its component parts. So with that in mind, guys, thank you very much, and catch you in the next lecture.